Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Tata Steel 2022, being held in Vikensee in the Netherlands. An open, well, not an open, it's a closed tournament. It's a closed tournament with a master section and a challenger section. And yeah, today's round 5. We had a total bloodbath of games. They were very fun, and we're just gonna have a lot of fun today. That's it. That's the entire introduction. So, as always, Magnus's game is timestamped at the end. If you jump ahead, I will scream at you, and you know the drill. And the first game we're beginning with is actually in the challenger section, so not the master section. The challengers are the players, not the challenged, the challengers. They are the 2550, the 2600s, the 2650s, all kind of grouped together from all over the world. And their leader right now is Arjun Erigaisi from India, playing Volodar Murzin from Russia. Murzin is like a 14, 15-year-old IM who's like 2550. I mean, he's going to be GM, obviously. And this game begins actually with a surprise on move 3. The Slav defense is super popular, shocking, you know, Slav defense played by Volodar Murzin. But normally white plays knight f3, knight c3, knight f3, e3, something. But to play the exchange Slav and create a total symmetry on the board, it's just Arjun's way of, I guess, surprising his opponent. And I suppose he's going to try to put some pressure on him. And yeah, I mean, well, what can I say? But all of a sudden, Murzin goes for complications of his own. So normally, what happens here is you play like on a totally symmetrical board, right? With knight c3, knight f3, but Volodar chooses to break that symmetry kind of immediately, and so we have like the bishop to d3, and we have the questions here of what's going to happen between the dark squared bishops, and Volodar takes. So he is not interested in creating total symmetry. He actually wants to create some winning chances. And here he plays this move. Queen d6 first. And now Arjun gets to play g4. So Arjun has the advantage of the guy took me, so I have the imbalanced structure, so I can play for g4, g5. Volodar goes back to g8. I mean, it looks like something kind of went wrong here for white. The best move here, according to the engine, if you actually let Stockfish run for a little bit, I mean, Rook c1 is one of the moves, is to play King f1. Now, if you play King f1 here, you should be drug tested on the spot. First of all, for, like, weed. But second of all, for, you know, some sort of Stockfish ingestion. Instead of that, Arjun plays f4, which is by far the more natural move. And he now kind of just takes a lot of space with his pawns. And what Volodar is basically saying is like, okay, everything is symmetrical, but you have double G pawns, you might overextend. I'm going to play this position in this fashion, and I'm also going to castle long. So I'm going to castle out of the assault on this side of the board. We have knight b5, queen b4 check, and now the king moves voluntarily anyway. Why is the king able to move so early, even giving up a pawn with check? Because white has an overwhelming lead of space and development. And so while black is kind of busy taking the pawn, you're going to kick the queen a couple times, maybe jump into d6 with check, maybe go here, maybe play queen a1, rook b1, and just triple attack on the a, b, and c files, right? So that's kind of the idea. And the rest of this game is really that. I mean, it's Arjun bullying his opponent on this side of the board, rerouting his knight to the c5 square, as you're about to see in a moment. Knight comes to c5. Position looks absolutely beautiful. Stockfish eval is absolutely beautiful. Only problem is the opponent has 7 pawns, 2 knights, a bishop, queen, and 2 rooks. So when you have such a massive pieces, yes, you can have advantage, but you have to find a way forward. And king g1 is not the way forward. Like this approach, king g1, queen e1, was a little bit slow, and it allowed Volodar to kind of break out right away with this move h6. He chose h5. Now, en passant is not forced at the 2600 level, and unfortunately for him, Arjun took the other direction, and then put a knight on h4 to trade off the active knight. So according to the engine, his advantage is actually gone. It was +2, now it's zeros. I mean, visually, I suppose black has made certain improvements, although black's knight completely cannot move. The bishop is stuck defending a pawn, and black you could argue it just has some weaknesses. But black does get a little bit of open lines and tries to sacrifice the knight, right? So he's trying to sacrifice this knight because if rook c4, there is just queen d5. So there's, you know, there's this. You can even play rook g2 first and then queen d5. So he's opening up the lines for himself to create counterplay. And the problem, though, for Volodar is that somehow his position is still a little bit weak on the queen side. And he does create a nice central blockade, but Arjun ends up winning the c4 pawn, and Volodar's best move here is actually to play like rook h7. I mean, it's just a super, you know, he's got to like double up, right? He's got to double up, put some pressure like this, take on g2. He goes rook g4, and suddenly the queens are going to get traded. And when the queens get traded, we now have a rook endgame, and Arjun is just winning. So he again, okay, well, disregard rook h3 a couple times. Yeah, he shuffled a few times. Then he broke through on the queen side. He played rook a1, and ultimately, in this rook endgame, the amount of weaknesses that black has is just going to do him in. So none of the pawns can move. Yes, there is en passant here, but you lose a rook. So please don't do that. Although Arjun had a very, very nice opening, what ends up surviving in this game is the cluster of pawns and the f-pawn. And he very methodically kind of moves the forces up together. Very nice. Pawn to f6, king to f8, pawn to f7. What he's got to do is deflect the king and kind of escape and force a promotion. And that's exactly what he does. So he rotates the rook over here, rook h7. He will create a shield for his king to escape, and the pawn will promote. And there's nothing really that you can do. If you go to e6, I will just go here. So it took a while. It took a while, but we got there. Sort of sustained pressure, and don't always listen to what the engine tells you. Arjun Erigaisi is crushing this tournament. He has 4.5 out of 5. Like, that is crazy that he has 4.5 out of 5. He does have 4.5 out of 5, right? Before I move on to the next games. Yeah, that's nuts. He's won 4 games and he's drawn 1 against a field of like 25-80 average. That is just ludicrous. Next game that I have for you is Jordan van Foreest versus Shahryar Mamedyarov. This is a battle of arguably the most handsome chess player in the world, and the gentleman who is wearing a hoodie to all his games. So Shahryar has played some crazy chess this tournament. He mentioned after this game that he was wearing a hoodie because he's actually not been feeling that great, which in the times of Corona is a scary thing to say, but he said he had a grippe, which is flu-like symptoms. And this game is a Spanish, so Ruy Lopez, and when you play against Shahryar, he is not going to play bishop e7, pawn d6, pawn b5, close position. No, he's going to take this pawn. This is not the Berlin. Don't confuse this with the Berlin. Slightly different, because we had Morphy's defense, right? But knight e4, and then Shah is going to glue the knight there with b5 and d5. This is known as the open Spanish. So Shahryar plays this all the time, b5, d5, taking on e4. Jordan knows that. In fact, Shahryar apparently played his first open Spanish before Jordan was born. Jordan's like 21. Just think about that. That's an insane stat. So bishop e6, and in this position, we go to the 4th most popular move, played in maybe just a couple hundred games, and by no substantial super GMs. I mean, a lot of good players, but not 2750, a4. So that move on its own isn't entirely shocking, but generally white likes to take a more central approach. Instead, we have a little bit of kind of pawn jostling on the queen side. So Jordan tries to put the pawn here, maybe use the a4 square in the future, disconnect b and a pawns, maybe create some weakness there, but Shah just sort of castles. Now, Jordan plays queen d3. We have knight to c5, and he just gives up his bishop. He gives up the bishop with the purpose of playing the move c3. Further pressure on d5 throughout the rest of this game. This knight will go to d2. This knight will go to d4. And we're gonna, maybe we'll play for f4, f5. It's an interesting position. As Mamedyarov said in his interview after the game, he said, he said, 50% of the time in Ruy Lopez, the game is boring. The other 50% of the time, if the players want to play an interesting game, they will. So that is basically what's happening here. So we have knight to e7. Knight to e7 is a novelty. Here there have been 2 games played, and both of them went with the move d4, which bishop e6, fe6, and then so on. Knight e7 is a novelty, I believe. We have knight to d2, trade, and bishop back to a7. The reason Shahryar does this is that the bishop is very strong from back there. You cannot take a6. I will take your pawn with check, and I will win your queen. I'm just going to play c5. So Shah said it himself in his interview. He was like, yes, I made a few backwards moves, but my position is very solid. I'm going to play c5. I had good pressure in the center. I have 2 bishops. I'm happy. Very imbalanced position. Here, Van Foreest could have played bishop to c2, threatening mate. Maybe Shah wouldn't see it. I don't know. He's also obviously thinking about f4, f5 stuff. But the problem with this, as good as it looks, this is just winning. So c5 attacks the knight and this. So black does have actually a pretty strong threat of his own. And so that's why you maybe want to get out of the way first, then maybe play for f4, not right away because c5 is still extremely strong, but that kind of conjoined pawns, f4, e5, always you want to play. If not, then attack on the dark squares with queen e3, knight f3, etc. Anyway, knight f3, c5, and Jordan jumps in with e6. And Schach just goes back. It's pretty wild. He can play so many backwards moves, but his center is still so solid. And Jordan really, really overextending here with the pawn, the knight. This is just, he could play c4 to win a bishop. He can play cd to win the knight. And when the dust settles, rook takes like this, knight f5, c4, we have a big tactical skirmish. And when the capturing stops, black has a bishop and a knight, and white has a rook and 2 pawns. However, this bishop is feeling a little bit claustrophobic, and a couple moves later, Jordan has to lose his a pawn, and this is kind of what we have on the board. White has an extra pawn, but d and c sort of cancel each other out, and it's really bishop and knight for the rook. 9 times out of 10, that's better for the guy that has the bishop and the knight. Also, this pawn is much easier to protect than this pawn. In fact, as the game progresses for a few more moves, there's a little tactical thing here. c4, Jordan decides to get rid of his c-pawn completely because he thinks that after takes, bishop h7, if king h7, he has this, which is correct. But what about king f8? Well, he gets rid of the bishop, and Jordan must have thought, I'm going to win this pawn, and we're just going to make a draw. However, queen b7 is the way to go. He should begin with queen b7 and something like king g8 and queen c8 and sort of harass the king. Instead of that, Jordan plays against the pawn, and after queen c7, he can't take because check, and if he can't take the pawn, black is just winning. So Jordan must have had an oversight there, because once this pawn arrives on c3, the queen completely covers this king, the pawn advances, and even though the king has to hide on h6, it's completely safe. So you can check the white king now, come down, and it's actually black who's swarming and playing for a win. There's absolutely no threats on the enemy king. King h3, queen slides into d1, and there's no moves for white. There's absolutely no moves. If you play rook g2, I'm going to force a queen trade. I mean, I can probably even force it going all the way back to d7, by the way. And again, the c-pawn survives. If this c-pawn does not exist, if it's a position like this, it's just a draw. Because, okay, it's knight and bishop versus rook, but with such few pieces, it's not going to matter. So Jordan goes for an interesting opening idea, but I guess got a little bit antsy in the middle game, wanted to kind of punish the setup of black, overextended, and Schach did a good job, but Jordan, even at the very, very end here, had to go in with queen to b7. I'm not exactly sure, obviously, I haven't spoken to the guy. I don't know what he evaluated here for himself, but I don't know. Obviously, it's easier to just sit here. Maybe he should have gone for it like queen b3, but then knight d5. So black is still kind of hanging on to the pawn. So anyway, that's neither here nor there. Mamedyarov wins his second game in a row. Third game I have for you is the game between Jan Krzysztof Duda and Sergei Karjakin. This one was crazy because, first of all, it was a Queen's Gambit accepted, which is super rare at top level. And then it was e4, b5. Now, e4, b5 is a lunatic variation that can lead to a position that looks like this. a4, c6, take, like this, and a6. Crazy line where black sacrifices this rook for very violent activity against the white center. And it's completely fine, actually, according to Stockfish. But Karjakin plays queen b6, which is a new line. I mean, I'm sure it's been played by someone, but it's a very, very new and trendy line, this queen b6. Like, basically being like, yeah, you can just you can just defend the pawn with the queen. And after bishop e2, position's almost never been played, and knight h3, we're like in totally new territory. So either, well, actually, bishop b7 is officially the first new move. Bishop b4 has been played before. So very strange position. Black is just given an extra pawn, but in this day and age, a big fat center, and, you know, very active piece play and dynamic opportunities counteract being down a pawn. E5, knight d5, and we sort of see why this knight is useful here, because when this happens, the knight moves to f4, right? If this knight was on f3, didn't have much mobility, but it goes to f4, and Karjakin is just trying to plug the center. You'll notice he's like, no, you absolutely will not get any activity against me. So Duda's like, that's fine. I'll just try to crack open your queen side with b3. If you try to create a pass pawn here, I do this, and it looks like you are maybe holding on, but you're not. Rook a6, I can take, I can play queen b5, you just lose. I mean, you're gonna get destroyed because my pieces are super active, and I just create too many threats here. Queen b5, bishop b5, I'm going to take, and kind of shows you the entire point of putting the knight there, right? So bishop b4, and it looks like Duda's finally going to win his pawn back on c4, right? Just bishop c4. No, he defends his center first, and then he blocks the center. He completely blocks the center for himself. Why? Remember last game we saw F and E pawns together? Because he's going for the kill. A5, F5, F6, E6, forcing the pawn through. But actually black is much better here. Stockfish loves the position here for black. It completely doesn't believe in the white space advantage. It thinks that giving black 2 defended C and A pawns is just going to be absolutely decisive. So Duda says, you know what, bro? You know what I have to do? G4. As Karjakin tries to break free, king h1, rook f1. We got to go all in on the attack on the king side, which was the incorrect approach apparently by Karjakin. Should have not gone for g6. Should have played something like bishop to d6 apparently, and if king h1, bring the queen back, or try to trade even, try to infiltrate with the queen. He chose to fight back on the king side, but that's not really where he's stronger, right? So it allowed Duda to get some play, and by the time that Karjakin went back and tried to activate his queen, well, the problem is that now white is in time, and white's coming. Look at this, Duda flying in here with the bishops, very unclear position, and not a lot of time. Jan Krzysztof does not have a ton of time here, so you know, he's got to balance the clock before he gets to move 40. Bishop h6. I mean, look at this. Just looks like monster attack on the black king. All he has to do is get to this pawn, and he wins. Literally, he's 2 moves away from winning. Right? But black is obviously going to defend and not let that happen. Rook b1, queen c4. The black queen is coming in. If you play queen h4 here, looking for this, I have the absolutely beautiful. It wins queen h4, if not for this move. Look at that. Can't take me because you're queen. That's why the queen has to be here. And if you can't take me, I take you. Let me tell you something. This is really dangerous. Your attack is stopped completely. So that doesn't work. So we have bishop back to e2. Queen comes into a2. Rook c1. And Karjakin's like just still doing stuff on the queen side. It looks like we're about to repeat moves, right? Rook c1. Karjakin plays rook to... He doesn't repeat moves. Look at that. The player's instant replay. They were shuffling. Karjakin's like, wait, I'm not going to shuffle. And I think Karjakin must have realized that... By the way, if you're confused, you can't take this. The queen is hanging. Bishop came back to e3, and here the players all agreed to a draw. The players agreed to a draw. But it's +2. They agreed to a draw because it's clear that they were going to shuffle, right? Or maybe he felt safer offering. And Duda had 2 minutes. There is a move here that is much better for white, and the move is rook to f1. I just don't know if without like 10 minutes to think about this move, you will ever find it. I mean, the point is to take the rook. Like you just play rook f1, setting up this. And then you play like queen g1. You just completely give away the bishop and you have mate, knight g6. And then here you have to not take because then rook e2 is actually winning for black. Because gh7, there's rook h2 and you lose. You have to play bishop f3 first. And then on rook h4, you have to play rook f2. So it's a forced sequence of moves where white completely defends himself from the incoming black assault and is going to take this knight and break through. Impossible to see with 2 minutes, much more possible to see with more time, and the players actually drew this game. But it was a crazy game, absolutely insane game. The fourth game that I would like to show you is between Richard Rapport, and Pragnananda Ramesh Babu. Rapport is playing some wild chess in this event, winning, losing, all his games super decisive. And nowadays, the meta here is to play knight to f3, although Mamedyarov a few games ago played g4. Knight c3 is not considered the best move because the Nimso is so good. Well, Rapport's like, well, kid, let's see what you got. Let's play a Nimso Indian. Queen c2 is one of the main lines. Castles, a3. And we have d5. Super, super principled variation here. Black gives up the bishop for the knight, but is going to attack the center, maybe take, forcing the queen to move. Just the main line. Bishop g5 pins the knight. c5 is a pawn sacrifice, intending to just kind of block up the center there with d4, and in the future, e5. So very, very sturdy center. This might look like a free pawn. It's not. I mean, okay, like, yes, it is, but the knight comes here. You're threatening all sorts of queenside assaults. Knight coming into e4 hits the queen and the bishop. It's not, you can't just take the pawn. Rapport here plays in a way that sends the game somewhere it's never been before, which is rook to d1, rook e8, and b4. This queenside looks like the least stable thing ever. It looks like he can get absolutely wrecked. And if you lose your extra pawn on the queenside, because Rapport is up a pawn, don't forget, Rapport took on c5, right? He took on c5. So he's gonna hang on to a pawn in this game and hope that his queenside doesn't fall apart. The computer hates this, by the way, for white. It thinks that black is better. Computer absolutely loves the attack on the queenside. It thinks that black is doing very well with the center control. But knight d2, take, right? So black has to find the move here. The move here for black is apparently e4, just continuing to push forward. And what white will do is kind of stop these pawns and then play for f3. Trying to break out. Knight takes e4, etc. Get the bishop out, castle. And I think what has to happen here is you have to find a sequence of only moves for black. You have to find rook a2. Which what the hell does that even do, right? Then you have to find knight e4, rook e4. You have to sack your rook. And then white plays bishop takes d3, not even taking it. So trying to hit you like this. You go back to e8. Now white castles. And what? And what? I mean, it's 3 pawns for a piece? Like, so Pragg has to find all these moves. He doesn't, because he's a human being. He doesn't just get to look at Stockfish the entire time. Plays king f8. King f8, I suppose, is trying to get out of the queen on this line. He will try to show us why he played this move, right? So I guess his idea is to kick out the bishop. So he wanted to play h6. But now we have a rotation to the other side of the board, and now Pragg builds up the center. But now we see this, right? So the initiative in the center of black is stopped. So Rapport now has to create counterplay around it, or at some point try to crack it open. So he goes for h3, right? And as Pragg tries to close up the center. But look at this. So I told you a moment ago that black has to play rook a2 at some point, right? Because that's where the open file is. Black doesn't get a chance to do that. Rapport closes down that side of the board and plays like this. And now just takes the knight. Because how else is he going to break out, right? What's preventing white from just playing f3 right now is just annihilation down the middle of the board. Something like this. Like, that is what is preventing white from breaking out. Black is just going to rip it all open and completely destroy you down the middle. So, but who's going to destroy you down the middle? These pieces. So you got to start trading them, right? You got to trade off some pieces. Now you have a position where you're still up a pawn, and you can kick out the pieces. You can actually move the pawns in the center. So at some point, he's either going to play f3 or he's just going to move all his pieces around, right? Bishop g2. And at this point, it must be settling in for Pragg that he's done something wrong and he has no play. It's very annoying when you have no play. You can barely move any of your pawns. You're sort of waiting for your opponent to untangle. So Pragg tries to go over here, right? Rook a8. The problem is there's knight c3. Rook a1 check, just king d2. I'm just in time. You're not actually creating any problems, right? So he brings everybody back and goes for a8, but look at this. King c3, what a gangster. And then plays rook d1, completely sacrifices this pawn. Rapport decides that he doesn't need this pawn. And if you play rook d2, king d2, I will just go here, win these 2 pawns, and win the game. Sorry. Idiot. Knight takes d2. Complete idiot. Sorry. That's why I'm commentating the games and they're playing. And now Rapport brings the king to the middle, so he doesn't need to castle. Just boop, boop, boop. Knight comes behind. Folks, if I ask you right now, okay? Pay attention. Come back to the tab. Come back to the tab. Don't watch me in another tab. What is white's biggest advantage in this position? You say 3-on-1, right? 3-on-1. That's where the advantage is. Black has some pawns here, but they're completely blockaded. That 3-on-1 is ready to roll through. And as I'm going to continue to click the forward arrow, you notice that Pragg tries to create his own advantage in the position. That's what chess is all about. He's trying to do something on his side of the board, but Rapport's just too strong. His rook is too strong. His knight is too strong. Everybody's too strong. He gets through. Oh, d2. Okay. Don't let the queen promote. By the way, here's a really nice way you can lose. Rook takes b7. Kabam. The knight is the only thing protecting promotion, so you fork the king and the knight, you allow a queen, and you lose the game. That did not happen because these players are better than you and I, and the king actually goes up. At some point, b7 will fall, and it's actually crazy that the king is the one who wins the b7 pawn. This guy has some insane mileage in this game. He goes all the way the length of the board, and there we go. Now we see the pawns going. Rapport still has to be careful not to like somehow blunder mate or lose all his pawns, but he ends up trading off the only pawn that can actually make it through, leaving just e4, and he wins the game on move 56 about 6 hours after play began. Very, very interesting game. Cool opening idea leading to a super imbalanced game, and that's chess. I mean, that's chess. Pragg has to outplay Rapport or outplay his preparation. He's unable to find the critical way to stabilize the position. It gets out of hand, and Rapport's in first place. He's in first. Tied with a few other players. We'll talk about that when the video's over. And now it's time, ladies and gentlemen, for our final game of the day. We will always be featuring a game of Magnus Carlsen, win, lose, or draw. And, well, this game was absolutely nuts. And we will always feature, regardless of the result, the game last. I don't care if it's the most exciting game in the world. I don't care if he draws in 5 moves. He's the world champion. He's earned this honor. If you're offended by that, I don't know what to tell you. Also, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? I have recorded 26 minutes of this recap, and you're just going to ignore all the other games? I mean, it's disrespectful. I understand YouTube slaps a lot of ads on these things, but come on. Come on. Ridiculous. E4. C5. He is playing for a win. He is going for a Sicilian. Now, Grandelius, very strong player. Super nice guy. Recently was on my podcast. I'm going to shout that out like every single time. But he is having a rough tournament. He's not having a great event. Knight f3, knight c6, and he's looking to bounce back. And let's see, what better way to bounce back than to beat Magnus Carlsen, right? That's a juicy rating he's got. Magnus plays a Taimanov with e6, queen c7, a6. A Taimanov Sicilian. Why did he play a Taimanov? Because he must have anticipated... Well, first of all, Taimanov is like a super spicy variation. Great thing to play for a win or a loss. He must have anticipated that this was coming. Grandelius played this g4 move also against Rapport a couple of rounds ago, and this game gets totally insane. So the point is that you want to prevent black from comfortably developing on that side of the board. I mean, if any of my students ever played g4, I would yell at them, just like I yell at you for skipping ahead to this game. But the difference here is that black is not interested at all in developing the king side. So black just develops fully on the queen side. Literally. I mean, he is just like, I don't even need to move this whole side of the board. White has built up a nice kind of stronghold against the black pressure. Black is going to try to do stuff over here. White is going to try to checkmate down the middle. If the queen moves up, it's mate. So that's, you know, in a nutshell, right? Queen comes back to d2 because bishop c5 was potentially coming. And now we have bishop to b4. By the way, this entire game has been played before by a Norwegian himself with white, Arian Tari. Arian Tari played this in some club match, European club match. Bishop d4 up until this moment. Or this moment. Magnus plays a new move. He plays h6. He's like, well, Nils, you have a chance to take one of my pawns. Which one are you going to take? Okay, you're going to take that one. I'm going to take with my knight. You want to kick out my bishop? You want to kick out my bishop? No. Take my bishop. What? Okay, e5. Ah. Okay, so it looks like Magnus is just going for this knight, right? So if you play bishop to e3, Magnus is going to take on c3, allowing queen takes d7 with check. King f8, and obviously queen takes b7 looks good, except for the fact that you get mated in a move. You get mated, so it doesn't look very good. So, Nils sacks the knight instead. Magnus takes it. Now the bishop's got to go, so the bishop goes back to b2. Position looks very good. Looks like Magnus is going to struggle. Obviously, short castling into just a massive attack on the g-file doesn't look very good. So he's going to have to probably bring back his knight, build up his center with d6, maybe king e7, right? Rook d8, blah, 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 blah. No, not at all. Magnus is like, just take my pawn. In fact, you can take my b pawn with check, and you can take this other pawn. You can take both pawns. You could just take both my pawns. I don't think this is his prep. If it is, guy's a lunatic. Yeah, d5 is a crazy move. So, obviously, if you can take a pawn and develop a piece and check your opponent, and they have to move their king out of check, it's probably a good move. Probably a good move. Now, if you take the next pawn, you will go here, and then if you take that, once again, you hang mate. Congrats. You hung mate and won twice in a recap, guys. Really. So, Niels goes here. Point being, he wants to put his bishop back on b3, make sure that they laser beam that king. White's position looks really good, I have to say, but Magnus shuts it all down. First of all, Magnus wins their mini-match of Connect 4, completely destroying this Dark Square Bishop's hopes and dreams. Keep that in mind, because that bishop is going to be suffering for a while in this game. Bishop comes back to b3. Position looks beautiful for white. But despite Magnus being a pawn down, it's almost completely equal. In fact, if anybody's pushing here, it's white, because it's black, because white can't move. We've seen this a lot throughout like these games. It's very difficult for white to make a move here. You know, it feels like actually black is the one creating the problems. Rook h3 is coming at some moment, just laser beaming everything on this side of the board, right? So Nils gives a check and tries to consolidate. Magnus plays bishop out to a6, seeing the entire length of the board, and begins creating problems on the queen side. Here we have a threat of a repetition. A threat of a repetition. But Magnus actually he played these moves to get closer to move 40. So if you shuffle a couple times, you get closer to move 40. On move 40, you get the extra time. Here comes rook h3. Threatening all sorts of nasty crap. Like, I mean, it's just, this move is a catastrophe. Just for example, let's just say we just very lazily play a move like rook to g1. Bishop f1! Attacking the queen and the bishop because it's pinned. So if you play queen a4, I just take your bishop. That is the threat. The bishop flies out, and I mean, you get getting killed, and this bishop moves and you get mated. So rook h3 is a crazy move. Nils has to take in the center first, and he goes rook g1. You say, well, Levy, what about bishop f1? Didn't you just say this? Yes, there's a difference. The difference is you opened up this, so now there's check. If king f7, there is check. That is the difference. A couple of moves ago, this was closed. You see? Nils is smart. That's why he's playing. That's why we're watching. So rook g1, there is no bishop f1, but there is bishop e2. There is bishop e2. Now we take king f7, queen a4. Looks like Magnus is still harassing that dark squared bishop. Okay, we have another threat of a repetition. We're not going to get it, but bishop b5 is a very annoying move. What do you play here? Your queen is hanging. What do you play? You play queen b4. Maybe I come in with my rook. Maybe there's bishop d3, right? Pressuring everything again. In this position, Nils plays an absolutely gangster defensive resource. He lets the queen die. He plays rook d g2. That is boss stuff. Maybe Magnus missed it. I don't know. Rook d g2, exclamation point. Nils Grandelius, I don't care if you're having a crap tournament. Rook d g2, bam, bam, bam. And now black has to shift it all. So now he's going rook back to h7, right? Because if you take the queen, I take g7. And then, right, I can win your queen as well. So rook goes back to h7. It's now time for Nils to make a statement. It's actually like he's attacking Magnus. Magnus plays queen to b6, and Nils gets the queens off the board. Whew! Sigh of relief. No one's getting mated. I'm still a pawn up. My name is Nils Grandelius. Here we go. Rook c8. Rook back to g5, attacking this. Magnus says, so? And all of a sudden, nobody's going to win this pawn, because this pawn's going to collapse. So you have to come back, and you are stuck in total paralysis against the greatest endgame player of all time. Some people debate that. Like, you're stuck defending this now, and you can lose this so easily. For example, let's say white plays king b1. Unpinning, right? Very easy. Kabam! Rook c2, rook h2. Total paralysis. All three of your pieces. Well, and the king, right? g5, and black wins. Black is down a full rook, but white cannot move anything. And if you try to play bishop to a1, you always lose the pawn race. So if you try to play bishop a1, I just go here. You unpin. Chop, 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 chop. Boom. How does it come down to his remaining pawn that decides the game? It's just not fair. So you are so close to losing here. Nils has to be super precise. He attacks the bishop, gives away the e-pawn, and tries to win the e5 pawn. Magnus continues to pressure, but there is one thing remaining here, and it's that a-pawn. That a-pawn is going to serve as the decoy to the black position. For example, if Nils had played rook a8, all the pressure has gone off the c-pawn, so you can just go here. So Nils finds a very nice resource to kind of deflect the rook away. He's just going to keep pushing that pawn. He goes to e7. Now he also activates, right, the bishop on the other side, and now we have some trades coming. Nils finally is able to liquidate some of the pressure, and on move 54, the players agree to a draw. Whew! Sigh of relief. And as they said in the interview, now Nils can say this was round one of his new tournament, you know? He drew, he drew it, and tomorrow we'll be back for round two. So, as always, it's very fun to make these recaps for all of you. At the end of 5 rounds, it's Arjun Erigaisi crushing the challenger section, and in the Masters section, it's Vidit Gujrati, who drew with Anish Giri today, with 3.5 out of 5. Shahryar Mamedyarov, and Richard Rapport. And if you want all the full standings, I know I didn't put them up on the screen today. There's a link in the description. So we all know that after you watch this video all the way to the conclusion, you're just gonna maybe go watch another Gotham video or you know, something else. I don't know. So you might as well go check out the standings on the website as well. Appreciate you all very much, folks. Thanks for hanging out with me as always. Very fun to make these for you, and I will see you in the next one. Get out of here.